gnash his teeth and take everything apart and start from scratch. Even then, he will say a silent prayer to the M&M gods. The chest is a relatively uncommon site for fistulas. In my case, when the gastric conduit or neoesophagus was pulled up through the chest to my neck, the everting gastric staple line on the lesser curve allowed gastric mucosa to be directly opposed to the paper-thin posterior membranous trachea. In terms of distance required to traverse, this was a fistula's dream. By any reckoning, my fistula was exceedingly unusual. The evidence suggested the process was chronic. Why had it suddenly burst forth now, and by what great good fortune in Boston rather than some hinterland? And with Mac back in town, as the nature and complexity of my problem emerged, I was clear I wanted no one else to tackle this. It is several days later. I am awake, extubated, and utterly amnesic. My hallucinations have stopped, thankfully. I had never hallucinated in my life, nor do I care to ever again. A hallucination is a bad awake dream that you can't wake up from. Mine were intensely real and detailed. 3 Moses-like faces leered at me from the tops of Christmas stockings hanging on the wall opposite my bed. Their long tongues unfurled toward me, threatening to uncoil me like tentacles. I knew they were evil, but I was helpless to stop them. One morning, I awoke, in quotes, able to see through the wall. There was a lighted space behind, and a small man dressed as Bob the Builder was silently at work in front of an electrical panel. He too, I was sure, was evil, perhaps planning a bomb. I was concerned enough to call my nurses multiple times to warn them and have security notified. Lastly, one afternoon, while listening to snippets of conversation outside my room, I fabricated out of whole cloth the most outlandish story. I heard Gabby railing against Mac for having deceived her about the seriousness of my condition and wanting nothing more to do with him. She had searched the internet and found a maverick American surgeon practicing in Montevideo who had repaired hundreds of these fistulas. I heard Gabby talking in person with a Uruguayan consul who had conveniently come over to the hospital to expedite my transfer by air ambulance. Gabby would be able to zip across the Rio de la Plata by hydrofoil and visit with family and friends in Buenos Aires. All of this without a word of input from me, and I calmly accepted this foolhardy plan as fait accompli. I now learned that while I slept unawares, a young pulmonary interventionist had come to my rescue. After 4 tries, Dr. M had managed to place an improvised silastic stent into my trachea. A dicey proposition, since my daring-do little Dutch boy not only had to stand at his post indefinitely amid mucus-drenched hurricane winds, but his finger had to be bile tight. He courageously fulfilled both duties without a whimper. Dr. M saved my life, literally. She had given me breathing room. Now it was up to time, antibiotics, and Hyperal to begin to erase the grotesque graffiti from my chest x-ray. Mac commanded that I sit up in a chair for 3 hours at a spell. Never has anything so impossible been possible. The clock ran backwards. At my first attempt to walk, after the laborious corralling of the maze of lines, pumps, monitors, and O2 tanks, my knees simply buckled to the floor. The goddamn NG tube, that cankerous conduit, was pulled by a blessed resident after 9 days, excruciating days, to the begging relief of my ulcerated nose and throat. One day, quite suddenly, the soles of both my feet went numb and have remained so. So I tread carefully. Despite my sudden and remarkable deconditioning, 2 weeks later, Mac pronounced me fit to undergo damage control surgery via laparotomy. He chipped through dense adhesions at the hiatus and the liver to free up the lower end of my conduit and divided it permanently at the pylorus. He placed a G-tube into the proximal end so that there was now no chance that bile could sneak north. Hazards lurked at this and all my subsequent operations. For one, the conduit lives tenuously on a single gastroepiploic artery, which may be difficult or impossible to visualize. The requisite J-tube became my despised but respected lifeline for the next 5 months. 1 month after my admission, I wobbled home with Gabby, tethered to pole and pump, and just barely able to gasp my way up the stairs to bed. What followed now was 7 weeks of painful, inching recuperation of the strength that had drained from me. Mac's command was feed and walk. The tube feeding was easy, just fill her up and flip the switch. Not once did I have to ask, "What's for dinner tonight, honey?" Easy they were, but my feedings were punctuated by unpredictable bouts of intractable nausea, during which I felt as though a bowling ball were suspended from my mesentery. I chose vanilla, though the flavor was moot to my jejunum. The vanilla did, however, seep into every pore of my skin and left me with a permanent abhorrence of the smell. I endured all the trials and indignities of J-tube-dom, including the dreaded nocturnal disconnect, which left me wallowing in a pool of vanilla sauce. My boys, however, were fascinated by the tube and all the apparatus. The first day I summoned the strength to pick Matthias up from preschool, he shrieked to his class, "This is my dad. He lives at my house with his vanilla smoothie." Walking was a more challenging proposition. The first day I shuffled to the corner and it seemed impossibly painful and dyspneic to go further. But like the stoically undeterred snail, one day I realized I had made it around the block. Unfortunately, all of my activity was paced to the cacophonous cadence of a savage and incessant cough. My distressed trachea struggled desperately to extradite its alien resident. With every fit, I expected my tenacious foreigner to come hurtling from my mouth. The cough was so convulsive that spells frequently ended only after violent retching, a wonderfully soothing finale for my freshly sliced belly. It was impossible to sleep more than 1 hour at a time, and that bolt upright. Gabby had to flee to another bedroom. The boys were constantly scared, and to this day, a single cough from me, and they ask with alarm, "Papi, are you going back to the hospital?" But I stayed the course, not because of any exceptional courage or will, but because there was simply no other option. These 7 weeks not only succeeded in preparing me physically and mentally for the next operation, they had given Mac time to contemplate his surgical approach to a problem with which he had no specific experience. None of the many colleagues he consulted offered much more than anecdote or opinion. All agreed this was an unusual and difficult challenge. I know Mac was apprehensive because he and I discussed his concerns at length. This would be a venture into a chest already scarred by major surgery and irradiation. What would the adhesions be like? Was the fistula alone? Or might a whole segment of the gastric staple line be welded to the flimsy posterior trachea? A gaping rent in the trachea could be disastrous. Moreover, the fistula was buried at the dicey confluence of several potential surgeon biters: pulmonary arteries, mainstem bronchi, recurrent laryngeal and phrenic nerves. All of these might be distorted in position and or appearance. And always there was the danger of devascularizing the conduit. One of my chilling fears was losing my conduit. The prospect of constructing a workable substitute in this setting would be daunting almost beyond hope. I had already many times painted the scenario of a permanent J-tube and a spit fistula in my neck and pronounced this a life intolerable. So Mac and I,